There exists a type of creature in this world. They have been discovered by a few people, but their existence has never been confirmed. We collectively refer to these creatures as unidentified mysterious animals, unconfirmed organisms, abbreviated as UMA. Hello everyone, welcome to the UMA series of videos. Among the various mysterious creatures, humanoid creatures tend to evoke the deepest fears within people's hearts, like the Swan Man and the Gray Man, we have previously discussed, because compared to aquatic monsters, large feline species, and other categories, a possibly intelligent alien-like creature that can evoke a sense of direct threat. Today, I want to share with you a creature with a bizarre form, which also frequently appears in the messages I receive. It is a type of humanoid creature called the Lizardman. The Lizardman. First, I hope everyone understands that the term Lizardman is, strictly speaking, a general term. Aside from the monsters we often see on screens and animated characters in the field of cryptozoology, it also represents a category of humanoid creatures with reptilian appearances. For example, the fetus lake monster in Canada, the Nkanyamba in South African folklore, and the Lafreniere swamp people that we previously discussed. The focus of this episode is the most famous among them, the Lizardman of Scape or Swamp, which caused a massive sensation in the United States in the late 20th century, also known as the Lee County Lizardman or the Bishopville Lizardman. All reported sightings originated in South Carolina, USA, near the Scape or Swamp, in Bishopville, Lee County. According to reports, it is a tall, humanoid creature, approximately 7 feet in height, covered in brownish-green scales, with red eyes, 3-fingered limbs, and a strong sense of aggression and territoriality. It is known to attack humans. Currently, most reports of the Lizardman are recorded in periodicals of that time, newspapers, television programs, and some online blogs. However, these sources often contain errors or missing critical details. As a result, key parts of the story are unclear. Therefore, next, I will use the book by American author Lyle Blackburn, published in 2013, Lizardman, The True Story of the Bishopville Monster, as the primary reference. I will share the events in chronological order as they originally occurred. Let's begin. July 14, 1988. A family in Bishopville reported to the police that their Ford luxury car had been maliciously vandalized. The side panels were scratched and dented. The hood ornament was damaged. The antenna was bent, and chrome trim was ripped off the fender. Some areas appeared to have been bitten by an animal. Even the wires in the engine compartment had been torn apart. The car was covered in clumps of reddish fur and muddy footprints. Local sheriff Liston Truesdale was called to investigate the scene. A wildlife biologist also collected samples of the fur and tracks. They concluded that the evidence might have come from a wild red fox or a group of red foxes. However, they couldn't explain why foxes would damage a car. About 25 yards away from the car, larger bipedal or quadrupedal footprints were found leading toward Scape or Swamp. The sheriff speculated that they might belong to wild black bears, but this conclusion did not gain universal acceptance. At this point, the police search attracted a large number of onlookers from the surrounding area. Some curious about the police activity also began arriving at the scene. Among them were well-informed local residents and reporters. As Sheriff Truesdale tried to disperse the crowd, he overheard people discussing how someone in Browntown claimed to have seen a creature about 7 feet tall with red eyes that might be responsible for the incident. However, after questioning, most people admitted they had only heard rumors. As the sheriff was preparing to leave, he casually asked a resident named Mr. J, "Have you heard about a tall creature, possibly green, with large red eyes?" The resident replied, "Are you talking about the Lizardman?" A Columbia-based reporter from the state. A reporter from the state recorded his words. This marked the origin of the name Lizardman. On July 16th of that year, 2 days after the aforementioned incident, Tommy Davis and his 17-year-old son, Christopher, walked into the police station. After learning about the Bishopville family's ordeal, they decided to report. A terrifying experience Christopher had 2 weeks earlier. Here's what happened. On June 29, 1988, Christopher Davis was working the night shift at a McDonald's restaurant. At around 2:30 a.m., he finished his shift and was driving home along Browntown Road. About a mile past the Scape or bridge, he was suddenly startled by a loud noise. Immediately after, his Celica began to shake violently, a clear sign of a flat tire. Frustrated, he cursed as he pulled over onto a dirt road to change the tire, preparing to replace it. He didn't have a flashlight, but his home was still 7 miles away. He had no other choice. He retrieved a jack and spare tire from the trunk and began changing the tire as quickly as possible. He thought everything was going smoothly, but just as he finished changing the tire and was putting the tools back into the trunk, suddenly, he was horrified to see, about 30 yards away, a massive bipedal humanoid creature, waving its arms and charging toward him. He described the creature as approximately 7 feet tall, with a wet, green, slimy appearance. Its upper limbs ended in only 3 fingers, and its large eyes glowed red. It was steadily approaching Christopher. Terrified, he ran back to his car. He later recounted that while sitting inside, he could see the creature's body below its neck, standing right outside the driver's window. Then, it suddenly leaped onto the car roof. Moments later, Christopher saw a pair of strange hands reaching down from the windshield. The skin of those hands appeared rough, the nails were black, and each hand had only 3 fingers. Immediately, he heard the creature emitting a low, deep, and unsettling growl. The roar, like a whisper from death itself, spurred him into action. He frantically turned the ignition key and slammed on the gas pedal to speed forward. As the car's engine roared, the creature was thrown off, but it quickly got back on its feet and chased after the car. According to Chris's estimate, when the creature closed in on the rear of the car again and attempted to jump back on, he was driving at a speed of at least 40 miles per hour. At that moment, Chris saw the creature through the rearview mirror, and then heard noises coming from the car roof. A strong survival instinct compelled him to swerve the steering wheel rapidly, trying to shake off the terrifying being. Although he didn't see the creature being thrown off, he was certain he had succeeded, as he no longer heard the thumping or scratching sounds on the roof. At that moment, he seized the chance and slammed on the gas, finally driving the car onto the main road. He then rushed home without stopping. Once there, he recounted the incident to his father. This led to the aforementioned report. Sheriff Truesdale arranged for 2 recordings of Chris's testimony. The details he recounted were nearly identical in both sessions. Afterward, the sheriff asked him to put aside preconceived images of the creature. Clearly, Chris lacked some drawing skills, but it was still evident in the sketch that the humanoid creature had 3-fingered features. Given the bizarre nature of the event, the sheriff asked whether they were willing to take a lie detector test. The father and son agreed to the request without hesitation. Meanwhile, as the media got involved, news of a bizarre humanoid sighting in Bishopville began to spread rapidly. On July 20, 1988, the term Lizardman made headlines in the Columbia State, San Francisco Examiner, The Times, the Utah Spectrum, and other major newspapers. The local Sumter Daily Item even placed the story on its front page headline. The news of the Lizardman sighting at the Scape or Swamp spread across the world. The chilling case details drew more and more curious visitors intrigued by mysterious events. South Carolina's Columbia radio station, FM 97.5, even offered a $1 million reward for the capture of a live lizard man. This caused armed hunters with guns to pour into the town. At the same time, it brought potential danger to local residents. Some armed individuals would instinctively point their guns at passers-by. However, at this time, Sheriff Truesdale and his team had no time to address these issues. They were busy every day, handling media phone calls and scheduling interviews. The lack of manpower caused the situation to spiral out of control, but the bizarre events did not end there. In the early hours of July 24th at 2 a.m., 2 local teenagers, Rodney and Sean, rushed into the Lee County Sheriff's Office. They claimed they might have seen the rumored Lizard Man. Deputy Wayne Atkinson received them. The two stated That just moments ago, they were driving with their girlfriends, 4 people in total, along Highway 15. Suddenly, they saw a massive, muscular, bipedal creature cross the road. It then climbed over a fence and disappeared into the forest. Atkinson, using his years of experience in law enforcement, judged that the two were telling the truth, as their fear was palpable. Soon after, just a few hours later, they received another call from a resident of Browntown. The caller claimed to have heard strange roaring sounds coming from the nearby forest. Given the recent Lizardman frenzy, Sheriff Atkinson decided, along with Officer Mike Hodge, to drive over and investigate. As they followed along Bramlett Road, while patrolling, they found some scattered trash along the roadside, including several crushed 40-gallon waste barrels and broken tree branches. At the time, they concluded these might have been marks left by passing trucks. They continued driving a bit further but found no useful clues. Then, they turned around and headed back. However, on their second pass through the area with the scattered trash, they noticed a series of footprints crossing the road. They stopped the car to investigate immediately. Upon inspection, they discovered that the footprints belonged to a large animal. The prints were about 14 inches long, with a width of approximately 7 inches at their widest point. They displayed an oval-shaped sole and a prominent heel. 3 claw-like toes were embedded in the soil, with a depth of nearly 1.5 inches. The stride length indicated that the creature's step spanned 3 feet. This was clearly beyond their understanding. From the time they left earlier to their return, only a few minutes had passed. The strange footprints were not present before. They followed the tracks for about 300 yards with guns drawn, but the dark forest instilled fear. They decided to wait until daylight to continue. What baffled them the most was revealed in later interviews. The ground in that area was incredibly hard. Even the 2 adult men could not leave marks on it. Yet, there were tracks. In the morning, Sheriff Truesdale arrived at the scene, cordoned off the road, and instructed officers to prepare plaster for casting the prints. The impressions on site seemed to indicate a heavy and massive creature had burst out of the woods, walked along the road for a distance, and then returned to the swamp. At this moment, clear skies were suddenly overtaken by clouds. They poured the mixture into the 5 clearest footprints. The casts were successfully made. At the same time, a pair of police dogs were dispatched by the State Department. Together, they followed the tracks into the woods. Near the bushes, the footprints became less distinct. In the end, a summer rainstorm washed away all traces. What puzzled the police was that the dogs couldn't pick up any scent. Several weeks after the incident, police received additional reports of early alleged encounters with a strange creature. The first came from a local construction worker, George Hullowman. He said that about 10 months ago, around early October 1987, he was riding his bike near the south side of the Scape or bridge near a natural artesian well. He stopped for a drink. After finishing his second cup, he lit a cigarette and instinctively glanced toward the swamp on the other side of the road. He noticed a tree that seemed to have been struck by lightning, but he quickly realized it wasn't a tree. It was a dark figure standing like a human, approximately 7 to 8 feet tall. Its entire body was black. He was so terrified that his hair stood on end, and his arm muscles tensed up. The creature seemed to be staring directly at Hullowman. They were locked in a standoff until a car drove by. The headlights shone into the creature's eyes. Under the light, Hullowman saw its enormous red eyes. The creature seemed startled by the car and turned away, heading into the dark swamp, disappearing from view. It was only then that Hullowman snapped out of it. He jumped onto his bike and pedaled furiously all the way home. On August 13, 1988, Hullowman provided a full written statement. The sheriff considered his testimony to be credible. Another resident, George Plyler, reported an incident that occurred 2 years earlier, in the spring of 1986. At that time, he and 3 workers were building a pig pen in the swamp. In some areas, the mud could submerge up to their waists or knees. When they reached the middle of the swamp, he felt a sudden chill, as if someone were watching him. He turned around and saw what he initially thought was a deer peering from behind a tree, but he quickly realized it wasn't a deer. It was some kind of bizarre creature he couldn't comprehend. Plyler described the creature's face as human-like, with red areas around its eyes. Its arms were longer than a normal human's, dangling like those of an ape. Its legs were long and thin, and it had no tail. Except for the head, its body resembled a lizard. The creature stood there staring at him for a while, then pushed through the bushes and ran away. Plyler stated, if it weren't for the recent Lizardman reports, he wouldn't have told anyone about this. He didn't want people to think he was crazy. He stated that he was a Christian, and had received a good higher education. He wouldn't lie. He was sure of what he had seen. Following the 2 reports mentioned above, a local pesticide sprayer, Frank Mitchell, also came to the police station at his wife's urging. He explained that due to the nature of his work, every morning at dawn, he would refuel his small aircraft and load pesticide. About a month before Chris's encounter with the creature, which was in late May of 1988, that morning, due to heavy fog, he delayed his takeoff schedule until the sun cleared the fog. He taxied the plane along the grass-covered runway. Just as he pulled the control stick to take off, he suddenly saw a humanoid figure crossing the runway in front of his plane. Mitchell stated that the creature looked at the plane and walked across the runway slowly. After he took off, he tried hard to get a better look at the creature. In an interview, he described it as follows. I couldn't tell if it had scales or fur. It was entirely grayish-brown. It had a face like a monkey. I turned the plane around as quickly as I could, but by the time I returned, it was gone. Later, when Mitchell was asked if what he saw could have been the Lizardman, he said he thought the creature he saw was more like a tall monkey, walking upright like a human. On August 6, 1988, the Columbia State front page featured a report titled Florence Man Claims to Have Wounded the Lizardman. The report describes a pilot from Shaw Air Force Base in Bishopville, Kenneth Orr, who, at 6 a.m. the day before, was driving to the base when he saw a strange humanoid creature charging at him from the roadside. He stopped his car and drew his gun to warn it, but the creature kept approaching. Orr said he shot the creature in the neck, causing it to collapse onto the car. It then stood back up and retreated into the woods. He presented the bloodstains and scales on his car as evidence to the police. Sheriff Truesdale believed his testimony and evidence lacked credibility. The scales were clearly from a fish. Ultimately, this case was resolved a week later, when Orr admitted to fabricating the story, in hopes of perpetuating the Lizardman legend. On August 18th of the same year, Christopher Davis, mentioned earlier, underwent a polygraph test. He was asked numerous questions, including whether he had consumed alcohol or drugs, the creature's color, and the speed of his vehicle at the time. The polygraph results indicated Davis's statements were credible, though the overall validity of the test remains disputed. However, Sheriff Truesdale believed that Davis must have seen something beyond his understanding that night. On August 28th of the same year, the Lee County Police received another report. Due to the special status of the witness, who was at the time a colonel serving in the Army Corps of Engineers, his name was not disclosed. Truesdale referred to him under the alias Mason Phillips. The colonel stated that on August 26, 2 days earlier, he and his wife were driving home after attending a wedding reception along McDuffie Road. Near a curve, close to Lake Ashwood, he saw a large, dark brown creature emerged from the darkness on one side of the road and crossed the street. He described it as a bipedal creature, standing about 8 feet tall. Its tail did not touch the ground. He slowed down to get a better look, but the creature had already disappeared into the dense forest. Given Phillips' special status, Sheriff Truesdale believed his account to be credible enough. The next day, he dispatched officers to the area to search for clues. However, due to several days of heavy rain, the search yielded no results. Not even footprints were found. At this point, the sightings of the Lizardman came to an end. As media attention waned, people gradually lost interest in the story. The so-called Lizardman seemed to vanish, fading from the public eye. It wasn't until the 1990s that local police reports of sightings of bipedal humanoid creatures began to come in again. However, the creatures described in these reports were more inclined to resemble Bigfoot-like ape creatures, so I won't recount each of them here. A more notable incident occurred in 2008. On February 28th of that year, a Bishopville resident, Bob Rawson, was preparing to drive out. He suddenly discovered that his Dodge Magnum was covered in scratches and damage. The edges of the front wheel fenders were severely scratched and bent. The edge of the hood had a jagged series of missing sections, as if something had bitten into it. There were also unidentified bloodstains on the car's sides and front. Mr. Rawson and his wife carefully examined the area around the vehicle. They found torn-up newspapers and some towels from their home. What puzzled them the most was that they hadn't heard any strange noises the night before. They also noticed that about 10 stray cats in the area were missing on the day of the incident. They suspected that some animal might have chased the cats and forced them under the vehicle. This resulted in damage to the car. Later, the police found a cow and a capsule's carcass in the field near the Rosen residence. No one knows if the marks on the car were caused by their struggle. The forensic laboratory of the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine tested the blood samples from the vehicle. When they gave the conclusion to the police, it was suggested that it might have been a pet dog. Sheriff Melvin stated that the damage to the car made him unable to accept this conclusion. He did not believe that a dog could exert such force. The Rosen couple stated that before the sampling, they had contacted a neighbor who raised sheepdogs. The sheepdog might have contaminated the samples while sniffing around the bloodstains. On July 4, 2011, the police received a similar report. Local resident Leon Marshall claimed, while going out to feed his cats, he discovered that his Dodge Caravan had been damaged. The entire front of the car, including the two side doors and the hood, was covered in marks resembling animal bite marks. On the damaged bumper, traces of saliva and white-brown hair could still be seen. The police ultimately categorized this incident as damage caused by an ordinary animal, such as a dog. However, the marshals stated that they hadn't heard any unusual noises the previous night. In early August 2015, a woman from Sumter County, Sarah Bella, submitted a report to ABC News, stating that on Sunday, after leaving a church in Bishopville, she saw a strange humanoid creature and took this photo. In May of the same year, a hunter named Jim Wilson recorded a video claiming that while driving on Highway 34 in South Carolina, he saw a tall, dark-skinned creature crossing a swamp. He described it as resembling a short-nosed, upright-walking, long-legged alligator with scales and a long tail. However, overall, the creatures in these videos looked more like a person wearing a poorly made monster costume. Personally, I find it unconvincing. The above summarizes, so far, all the major related events about the Lizardman of Scape or Swamp. Over the past few decades, its name has spread worldwide, but to this day, no one knows whether the Lizardman truly exists. The mainstream media and academia have speculated about this creature, and the theories can be categorized as follows. The first theory is the reptilian evolution theory. John Rhodes, a paranormal researcher and an authority on terrestrial reptilian, humanoids, and reptilian extraterrestrials, believes that the so-called Lizardman, including half-snake humans and half-fish reptilian humanoids from myths and legends across various human civilizations, might have evolved from surviving dromaeosaurs after the late Cretaceous extinction event. This theory, in fact, is based on the speculative species theory, proposed in 1982 by paleontologist Dale Russell, also known as the dinosauroid theory. The premise of this theory is that the environmental catastrophe 65 million years ago was not as catastrophic as imagined. Some small ceratopsian dinosaurs, particularly dromaeosaurs, might have survived by chance. Compared to other species of similar body weight, dromaeosaurs had larger brains. Over time, they eventually evolved into a bipedal creature with brain capacity, similar to humans, possessing intelligence. This is the form we see today, closely resembling the rumored depiction of the Lizardman. Although the introduction of this theory has been criticized and questioned by many scholars, it has still gained some acceptance. Professor John Rhodes, mentioned earlier, believes that if this conclusion is valid, it might suggest a species occupying the same ecological niche as humans, living in remote underground areas of the Earth. They wander on the planet, and their civilization might be beyond what we can imagine. Of course, this conclusion remains speculative, as We have never found fossil or skeletal remains of such creatures. Dr. Shannon Malabard, a biologist from the Hall Oceanographic Institute, believes the lizard man might be animals that underwent genetic mutations due to extreme environmental changes or human-induced factors. Remote areas are often sites for industrial waste and wastewater dumping. Some of the chemicals or pharmaceutical residues might act as mutagens, causing genetic mutations or chromosomal abnormalities in organisms. Over time, these changes could lead to uncontrollable alterations in morphology. Near Bishopville, there is indeed a waste dumping site. This explanation has gained some support from online users. Cryptozoologist Professor Richard Freeman has a completely different opinion. He does not believe that dinosaurs evolved into primate-like creatures, because based on current theories, evolution is more about adapting to the environment rather than becoming more intelligent. He believes the so-called lizard man is most likely the result of misinterpretations, possibly mixed with human-made disguises or media-fabricated hoaxes. It is also possible, of course, that this is a supernatural phenomenon. American skeptic Benjamin Radford believes the entire lizard man story does not hold up to scrutiny, from the initial famous sighting by Christopher to later reports from high-ranking military officials. The creature's image seems to have continuously evolved and improved, but in reality, none of the witnesses have explicitly stated that they saw a lizard man. They simply reported seeing strange creatures. The term lizard man itself originated from media exaggerations. This led to locals habitually attributing unexplained incidents to the so-called lizard man. He believes that money is the real driving force behind the lizard man phenomenon. In fact, this conclusion is, in my opinion, quite reasonable. There is no doubt that the appearance of the lizard man had a significant impact on the region. It can be said to have directly contributed to the local economic boom. Merchandise related to the lizard man appeared almost simultaneously with the event's popularity. Lizard man t-shirts, hats, masks, souvenirs, and even theme songs emerged. The summer of 1988 was jokingly referred to by the media as Lizard Man Mania. Its news spread worldwide. Tourists and interview teams flooded the streets. According to interview records from Professor Blackburn, some local officials even resigned from their positions to sell lizard man merchandise, earning a fortune. Newspapers, magazines, and even advertisements used the image of the lizard man. Later on, television and online news, mystery documentaries like Monster Mysteries, debated whether it was fact or fabrication. The ultimate truth. American Monsters and Mysterious Events, among others, further deepened people's impressions. As a result, now, whenever someone mentions or searches online for Scape or Swamp, information about the lizard man is inevitably included. Professor Radford, using some tools, conducted experiments. He believes that the reported vehicle damage incidents were human-made. Perhaps it was caused by a screwdriver, or maybe by a pneumatic grinder. People, however, tend to associate it with the lizard man. Similar experiments have been showcased in documentaries such as Fact or Faked. The experiment proved that power tools can easily create marks resembling bite marks or scratch-like impressions. At the end of the program, they also conducted a sociological hoax experiment. A team member dressed in a lizard man costume and recorded a video in a dark forest. The video was then uploaded online. In the end, they found that while some comments were skeptical, most people still expressed belief in the existence of the lizard man. Regarding Christopher's claim that he passed a polygraph test, Professor Radford stated that he spent significant time searching for the polygraph machine, but ultimately found nothing. As a result, he could not verify the claim's authenticity. However, regarding this incident, there is another seemingly minor detail that might provide a reasonable explanation. It suggests that what Christopher saw was actually another local resident. This theory was not reported, but has been passed around among local residents. It is said that a local bean farmer, named Elmore, about half a mile from the swamp, he built a small shed to store dried beans. To keep it cool during the summer, he installed several air conditioners However, because it was left unattended at night, it became a target for thieves. To prevent the new air conditioners from being stolen, he decided to stay overnight in the shed. The following night, he heard a car stop on Brownstown Road, and thought it might be the thief. So he wrapped himself in a coarse cloth, and rushed out of the shed. He saw a car parked on the roadside, with someone standing next to it. He ran toward them to chase them away. Perhaps because his appearance, draped in coarse cloth, was too frightening, the person screamed and jumped into the car, quickly driving away. The key is that the location of the shed was not far from the area where Christopher reported his flat tire. However, the main character, Elmore, never accepted any interviews. The above information comes from Professor Lyle Blackburn's interview with a friend of Elmore. He said that a few days after the incident, Elmore saw the bizarre story in the newspaper, and began to wonder if the person he chased that night was Christopher. The coincidence was just too great. Sheriff Truesdale stated that he had questioned Elmore privately at the time, but Elmore's answers were inconsistent. When pressed for details, he outright denied the events of that night. Thus, the sheriff concluded that his story lacked credibility. Nevertheless, I believe that these speculations can only partially explain some of the sightings and leftover evidence. Whether the lizard man truly exists remains a mystery to this day. We cannot deny the image of half-human creatures does indeed exist, and is recorded in myths and legends from around the world. For example, Sobek in ancient Egyptian mythology, Makara in Buddhist mythology, and Nuwa and Fushi in Chinese mythology. In the Carolinas in the United States, there was once a Native American tribe called the Eno or Ganani. The residents said their ancestors told them about a group of tailed humans who interacted with them. Their tails were as thick as an adult's arm, and about 1 meter long. Unlike the tails of quadrupeds, which can move, their tails were tightly connected to their bodies like a crocodile's. When they wanted to sit down, they needed a recessed area to place their tails. Their fingers were long and wide, their skin rough and scaly. They only ate raw fish, but after eating the fish, they would die, without leaving any offspring. Though it seems far-fetched, this is their legend. Ultimately, whether the lizard man truly exists has now become irrelevant. Its story has evolved into a cultural phenomenon, inspiring imagination and exploration. Although there is insufficient scientific evidence, it remains a modern urban legend that continues to influence local culture and the economy. Humanity's curiosity about the unknown and the pursuit of mysteries will never cease. This is also the driving force behind our civilization's progress and development. In the end, as the saying goes, the unknown is always greater than the known. This is the charm of UMA, unidentified mysterious animals. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching.